My name is Russ Collins. I'm with the Art House Convergence, and I also operate an art house theater in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so, as an art house operator myself and founder of the Art House Convergence, my work and passion is focused around community-based, mission-driven art houses and how they might serve to attract and be a home and forum for independent films in communities large and small all over the world, particularly in North America. However, the members of this panel are focused on getting independent film seen across all platforms and channels. Playing the community art house may or may not be part of their marketing and or distribution strategies and tactics. Now, this makes me a little sad, but I understand the complex Crossroads. So, I actually thought this would be a little funnier to start off with, so it's okay to laugh. But not when the panel gets here, that's serious. But we do have a complex crossroads that these folks are facing and trying to make their way through. All kinds of marketing and distribution challenges, along with the challenges of being a fan of the Chicago Cubs, has been the lifelong passion and the work of NY Indie Guy Symposium subject Ira Deutchman. With this panel today, maybe some enlightenment can be shed in this complex media landscape. Obviously, this is much more than the crossroads of distributing independent films to cinemas versus distributing directly to individuals via digital devices and digital downloads. However, because this conflict is one that Netflix appears to want to thrust upon the playing field, this topic is incessantly and for the most part fruitlessly discussed in the entertainment and mainstream press. But truly, what will the role be for theatrical exhibition as we move deeper and deeper into the 20th century? And I just have to say that I did give a talk earlier this week about how that theatrical exhibition is unstoppable. So I hope the panel tells me I'm right. So if you can hear me, please tell me I'm right. In another crossroad, somebody laughed, that's good. In another crossroad, and defining and redefining the channel types and matching, or is the crossroad the defining and redefining of channel types and matching each of the films to the appropriate channel? Is it building a complex distribution matrix that combines all the channels, theatrical, broadcast, direct individual distribution, etc., to maximize cinema market impact, but not having to spend a fortune marketing to all of those possible channels? Speaking of marketing, is marketing indeed the primary crossroads that we're facing in this era with so many channels and so for marketing and distribution that the fragmentation makes it very difficult to build a sizable core audience for any film, and it just seems to get harder and harder. These days, these are just a few of the crossroads that we face in distribution and exhibition. Now, these three talented experts on cinema distribution and marketing, plus our gifted moderator, will guide us through to help us better understand the complex conundrums faced as we try to better choose the right path of the crossroads ahead. So our first panelist is Elise Oxidized, and she has quickly made a name for herself in the digital realm in the film industry. Elise's desire is to disrupt how we see cinema around the world. She is dedicated to developing and strengthening relationships with filmmakers, distributors, and OTT content providers to ensure that diverse content finds distribution, from marketing to sales, business development. She's held various positions, including at the New York Film Festival, BAMCinematek, Rooftop Films, Fandor, Distribler, and Good Deed Entertainment. Elise received her master's degree in film studies from Columbia University and graduated magna cum laude from Winston-Salem State University with a bachelor's degree in English and Communication. She's originally from Durham, North Carolina, and she has lived in New York, San Francisco, and she currently lives in Los Angeles. So why don't we get all of the panelists to come on out? This is Elise. Our next panelist is soon to arrive, but the other panelist here is Jeff Deutchman. Jeff is the Vice President of Content and digital distribution, then the buyer of domestic product for Neon, a distribution company formed by Tom Quinn and Tim League. Jeff has acquired such films as I, Tonya, The Lobster, Meet the Patels, Boyhood, Blue is the Warmest Color, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, The Human Centipede, Valhalla Rising, Sleepwalk with Me, Dirty Wars, The Central Park Five, Kill List, Room 237, After School, The Art of Stealing, and Medicine for Melancholy. Jeff is a programmer, or was a programmer for the Tribeca Film Festival, and has worked as an acquisition executive at IFC Films, Paramount Pictures, and Alchemy. He produced the election documentaries 11-408 and 11-816. And yes, he's related to Beth Krieger and Emily Deutchman and Ira Deutchman. There's another panelist expected, Ryan Werner. Should I introduce him or should we just move on?
Go ahead. Please do.
Okay. So Ryan Werner, who is just about to arrive, he's at 24th and a half Street right now. He currently works as a senior executive for Cinetic Media. Ryan is a longtime indie film marketer and publicity executive. He's worked in New York for over 17 years building campaigns for indie films. Ryan's boss, John Sloss at Cinetic, said, "The distribution marketplace is mutating on a daily basis and increasingly allowing those making content to have a hands-on involvement in the distribution of their films." Ryan expands dramatically the toolbox of advisory services our company can provide. Previously, Ryan worked at traditional distribution companies including IFC, Magnolia Pictures, Wellspring, Palm Pictures, Shooting Gallery, and Sundance Channel. He's been involved with orchestrating the campaigns for films that include Short Term 12, Is the Tall Man Too Happy, Escape from Tomorrow, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, Sleepwalk with Me, Tiny Furniture's Che, and many others. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome our distinguished panel. My name is Ryan Werner.
Oops. Please introduce yourself.
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Eugene Hernandez, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Film Society of Lincoln Center. Thrilled to be here with you, and Ryan, our missing panelist, will be here. According to the text I just got, momentarily. I think he actually found the building, finally. So we'll see him momentarily. But I wanted to start with this. Well, I kind of wanted to start with the statement that Russ referred to, and also that's included in the description here, and that is this notion of crossroads and what that means for independent film to be at a crossroads. And I'm going to start with Jeff, and then Elise, and when Ryan gets here, ask him to also reflect on this same question. And maybe what we'll start with is.
Sorry.
Ryan was in Los Angeles last night, and you were out there with Michael Moore, I believe.
I was.
Welcome back. Russ just introduced all of us, and I'm going to start. Our first question is really about this notion of independent film being at a crossroads and what that really means. And I think Russ wisely questioned what that crossroads actually is. So Jeff, I'm going to start with you and ask you to sort of, and ask each panelist to maybe as a way to answer that question, start by telling us or reflecting on where independent film or distribution marketing, where it was when you started in the business compared to where it is now, and how that evolution that you've seen from your specific vantage point relates to this notion of being at a crossroads.
Yeah, it's
If that's an appropriate word or not.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I really do think it matters what you're comparing the current landscape to when you ask this question. And since you specifically asked that as it relates to when I started, you know, I started in the business officially in 2006, which was right on the precipice of the recession. Right. And so, you know, from my vantage point, as someone who has always worked at companies that I think straddle the line between a traditional theatrical approach and a more disruptive approach, starting with my time with Ryan at IFC when we were really one of the two pioneers of the day and date distribution strategy. My vantage point is actually, paradoxically, that I've never felt as good about the theatrical prospects for independent films as I do today. Certainly versus when I started in the business. And, you know, in part, the reason I feel that way is when I look at what companies like Netflix are doing, I see them as very successfully taking over the home entertainment space. You know, movies that would have been released through a day and date strategy in 2008, 2009 are now by and large being released on streaming platforms like Netflix. I also see them threatening the ability of studios and independents to reliably release mediocre movies in theaters and make money off of them. But I don't see them really successfully threatening great quality films in the independent space or big franchise films in the studio space. And ironically, what I do see is that a lot of these movies that are going to Netflix are movies that otherwise might be crowding screens and making it more difficult for us to get screens and for those great films to thrive, and now making it easier by taking those movies out of the mix. So I actually feel relatively strong about the state of theatrical.
And maybe just to follow up on that and to ask you to elaborate on a little bit more about why you feel, not only why you feel confident about it, but why you think it's a stronger moment now than perhaps it was in, 10, 12 years ago. What are the others, or what are some of the sort of guideposts, or what are some of the sort of examples of whether it's specific films or specific changes in distribution that you think have led to this moment where you can feel so confident about sort of where this is going?
Well, I think specifically, and again, I'll tie this back to my vantage point. Currently working in my capacity at Neon, I see some of the work that we've been doing, as well as a lot of the work that A24, for example, has been doing, and taking films that I think the conventional wisdom would have been, these are tough theatrically because they're for a younger audience, and therefore younger audiences are more likely to either pirate them or view them on a streaming platform, and turn that conventional wisdom on its head. So I've been witnessing this happen before I worked at Neon. I think A24 has done a great job of proving that out on a lot of films. And now that I've been working at Neon, I think I've seen that on our films as well. Movies like I, Tonya, which we never expected to do $30 million, and then it did. A movie like Three Identical Strangers, which, has exceeded our wildest dreams, getting to $12 million. Those are just a couple of examples, but there are really a lot of examples of films that have just exceeded the conventional wisdom of what they should do in the marketplace.
I want to come back to some of the films you mentioned in a little bit, because I think they're really good recent examples that we can kind of dig into as case studies to help illuminate some of these points. But to keep the conversation going, and thank you, Jeff, we'll come back to this, this topic. Elise, I'd like to hear it from the same question answered from your vantage point.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned Netflix, because I think Netflix has brought us to this crossroads. I always like to say that the tech industry has kind of single-handedly shifted the industry because platforms like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, they're first and foremost tech companies. So it's really interesting. And then, so I've been in this industry for about since 2009, and I've worked exclusively in the independent space. And what I've seen increasingly over the past 9 years is that, there's a huge increase in people making content. It's much easier to make content. We've even shifted the word independent film to the word content. So it's something that, I've been paying closer attention to. And I've worked in kind of the aggregation space, probably the bane of your existence. But aggregating maybe not so great films, but trying to find an audience for those films. So we're having this increase of content and like I said, I'm aware when I use that word content, and then, you know, a kind of like a decrease in where this content is seen. So it's kind of like this, I think this crossroads is kind of muddled for me right now, so I'm trying to figure out where the next shift is happening, and I don't think the shift is going to happen when, oh, we're just going to try to compete with Netflix. It's about thinking kind of beyond Netflix.
It's hard to, as the two of you have already proven, it's kind of impossible to have a conversation about a crossroads, if that exists, without using the word Netflix.
Exactly.
And I wonder, at least as a follow-up, if you could explain how, in light of what you were just saying about the work that you do, how has Netflix complicated or challenged the work
Yeah.
that you're doing?
So,
that you've been doing?
You know, I'm pretty sure most of you guys have a Netflix account or have access to a Netflix account, and you see the majority of original films, original shows, and you might notice that, like, oh, maybe they're not for, like, there's something that I'm interested in, but it's not as compelling work, or it's not something that's like, oh, I was kind of missing the, you know, something about it. You know, Netflix is focusing mainly on original content and less about buying more and more independent films. Like, there are direct output deals, which means, you know, they have, you know, distributors have a set amount of films they can distribute with Netflix, exclusive with subscription-based VOD. But, so yeah, so they're moving away from, you know, just acquiring a bunch of independent films and more so making their own independent films, or acquiring them straight out of festivals, or pre-acquiring them before festivals. So.
Okay, so we're gonna come back to some of that as well, and I wanna dig into how that, just that last 15 seconds of what you said, how that is also complicating and challenging this notion of sort of where we are and whether there is a crossroads. Ryan, same question to you, and in asking you the question, because you're a little bit older than the folks on the panel, it helps us go a little bit further back, and with that's sort of where I'm trying to go with this conversation as well, to look at sort of this notion of crossroads in comparison to what. And so maybe if you can, by way of further introducing yourself, give us a sense of sort of where this world we're talking about was when you started, and how you contrast it or compare it to where we are now.
I started probably 10 years before Jeff, and I would say, I mean, honestly, I often feel like I'm so in the process of working on movies that I don't step back and think about what's happening. But because I am working with so many of the companies you mentioned, including your company, Neon, A24, Netflix, I mean, it's hard not to begin to understand how things are changing. I definitely feel for quality films, there's probably more options and opportunities than there's ever been before. I feel like with Netflix, I think a good way to look at Netflix is to look at documentaries and what they've done for documentary. I think that they've really spent money and put time into raising the form in a way that, like, millions of people have seen documentaries. Now, I think there's some crazy statistic that, like, everybody that has Netflix has seen at least one documentary. But I think it's led to this year, and like the idea that people are going to the theaters to see documentaries. I mean, I think it's not just because Netflix, you know, made them popular again, because it's also the work of the distributors that put them into theaters. But I think that they've done an amazing job at kind of raising the idea of the documentary and what it can be. And I think we're having this amazing theatrical year also. And I think it's interesting because I'm working on foreign language films, bigger films that you might expect to be theatrical, like a Coen Brothers movie with Netflix, and it'll be interesting. I think on the foreign language side, the fact that they're really investing in some of these films now is going to could be like a game changer, especially as theatrical distribution for foreign language films has been like really, really tough. So it's something I'm definitely interested in. And then, you know, I think like one thing I've noticed though at festivals, where I do a lot of work on films that are for sale, is that there are a lot of great movies, and if you don't get A24, Neon, Annapurna, Focus, you know, those are the filmmakers probably first choice in a lot of cases for kind of auteur-driven movies, and there's not a lot of other choices for these films. So it's something that I think, for young, kind of edgier films, there's only a certain amount of players that can do them. So, I think that's something I've definitely noticed. And I don't know, the other thing is I would just say, I read this article about this movie Thunder Road and how the filmmaker took it out on his own. And it kind of reminds me of like every couple years there's the exact same story. Like filmmakers are taking things into their own hands, and like it's true, and I think sometimes filmmakers can do it, but that's definitely like something I think that's stayed the same since I started working in film. There's always a way that a filmmaker really wants to get their film out there. I think there's ways to do it. I worked on a movie Columbus last year with Sundance under the same program. Thunder Road went out under with like they raised I think under $200,000 at P&A and made $1 million at the box office. Just really through publicity and some smart grassroots.
As a follow-up to you, Ryan, let me ask you to respond to something that Jeff was talking about, and the moment when he was getting started in 06, I think you said, 07. 06 you started, 07 was really the kind of turning point for the industry and also for the financial sector, and a lot changed after 07 into 08, 09. Coming out of that 10-year period, or at the beginning of that 10-year period, I should say, I don't think a lot of people on panels like this would have predicted that someone like Jeff Deutchman would be so bullish on the potential for theatrical. But I think there's plenty of reason why you should be and why you are. But how do you view that with the extra 10-year span of what sort of the work you did in the 10 years before Jeff got in the business and the sort of 10 years since then and 12 years since then? How do you feel about this kind of optimism for theatrical?
I still feel pretty good about it. I think like I always believe in theatrical. I think that for me, like all these other platforms are obviously how people are watching movies and should be taken advantage of. But like even when we were working at Jeff and I were working on all these day and date movies at IFC, it was very clear that some of them could have had much bigger theatrical lives, and that the trade-off was that the idea was maybe they were getting more eyeballs through other platforms, but I still think like there is definitely an audience for theatrical. I think theaters have become better at promoting films and finding their audience and reaching them through social media and other ways, like the Film Society is an obvious example. I think that's improved a lot. I think theaters know that they have to eventize everything they do if they want people to come. And yeah, I don't.
Do you all think that the industry underestimated or was too quick to kind of call for or predict the death of theatrical 5-10 years ago, or do you think it's just a natural reaction to sort of?
I'm going to jump in because I think it was kind of premature, but what we saw with a company like MoviePass, even though it's got a lot of bad press lately, but it really showed something very important because it was the belief that, and it was a common belief that millennials just didn't go to the theaters and like, oh, it's not for younger crowds, we should do a day and date or a platform release, like it's just not, it won't work. But what we saw with MoviePass is that, yes, it's going to work if you provide a cheaper option. So it's sad that MoviePass is, possibly going by the wayside, but it's also really important to realize that, hey, they has like 2 million subscribers for MoviePass, and people were actually going and taking a chance on independent films. And there was some good marketing. Even, I can even say that I watched 3 Identical Strangers on using MoviePass. So it's definitely worth noting that it's premature. People still want to go to the theater, but it just needs to change. Something needs to change.
I just want to say I completely agree with that, and though I didn't officially start until 2006, I do have some legacy knowledge that happened before that, and like my understanding, I'm totally aware that that prior to that recession period when I started, things were very robust, right? And so when people are saying that the sky is falling now, they're often thinking back to some distant golden era, whether it's the early aughts or the 90s or the 70s or whatever. And I think that it's, like, my sense of things is that it's mostly cyclical. And I think the question is whether Netflix is just like the latest in the parade of threats to theatrical in the line of VHS and DVD and transactional VOD and everything else, or if they're like this paradigmatic new thing that fundamentally threatens it in a new way. And I think it's just the latest in the line, and that actually what they threaten is mostly home entertainment. You know, I think they successfully do that, and I think they might be different in the sense that I do think they crowd out the space for the studios and independents to reliably make money on mediocre movies in movie theaters. But I actually think that that makes things easier for great movies.
I also think that they're spending enough money and getting their films out there in a big way, that they're gonna start exciting people about movies too. I think like this year, they're gonna have a remarkable slate of films with Roma, the Coen Brothers film, the Orson Welles film. They have films like Jeremy Saulnier, Tamara Jenkins, Nicole Halsener, Suzanne Bier. It's a pretty
And so this is where Netflix becomes more controversial, because this is where I think they're overreaching. I like what they're doing in general. I think that they, you know, I agree with you that they like made documentaries something that's more viable to a broader audience, to the point where it's actually not cannibalizing their potential in theaters and actually helping. But when they, you know, are financing or getting involved with a movie like Roma, which is clearly meant to be seen in theaters, and then being dogmatic about their model and not allowing it to be seen in theaters in any meaningful way, I think that that's an overstep.
I think the trade-off is it would never have been made, and that's for sure. It would never have been made this way. The filmmaker got to make it how he wanted to make it, and it will be seen in theaters, not in the way that, you know, like A Star Is Born will be, but it will be seen in
Well, the
art
question
house
is,
theaters.
will it be seen in theaters as much as Amour was seen in theaters?
I don't think so, but I think it's a little bit of a question mark how they're gonna release it.
And I am glad it's gonna go on Netflix, because it is gonna reach a larger audience that kind of needs to see a film like this. Like, and I think that's going back to the point I was going to make with MoviePass. Like, sometimes when these films are alienating to certain communities, especially certain communities of color, where we're not being marketed to the way we should be marketed to. With a film like Roma, I hope that it's going to get worldwide, you know, on Netflix. So I hope that there will be other cultures that are going to experience this film. Yes, it should be shown in the theater, absolutely, but it also should be available to people who are in, you know, more remote areas in the world.
But I mean, every movie goes to a streaming service eventually.
Not every movie.
Well,
Unfortunately, I wish.
this movie would. This movie would.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Roma is the one that's the most, it's the movie that enables us to talk about independent film at a crossroads, because one can imagine a movie like Roma. If Roma was made in 06, 07, before the most recent financial crisis, you could imagine a world in which Roma was released by one of the mini majors and would be getting just as much talk for its awards potential and critically acclaimed and everything else, but the way it would be seen by audiences, the sequence in which it would be seen by different audiences would be different than the sequence in which it's going to be seen now. It's an absolutely exceptional film that when you watch it on a big screen, and I've seen it twice on a big screen now, and I look forward to seeing it a third time on a big screen, it's one of those that you want to drag people to, and you want people to see it in that experience, with that experience in the big screen, it's gonna be a different movie on someone's small screen, whatever size screen. But when you were talking earlier about the distinction between quality movies and sort of mediocre movies, like Roma came to mind because it sort of challenges the notion that, like, because it's so good. Like, to me, it's one of the best movies in a few years, like, in my opinion. I think it's just it's an exceptional film. But it doesn't quite fit.
Right, so I guess I should caveat what I said by saying it's not for lack of trying that Netflix is, that the way I see them successfully challenging the current order of things is limited to what I said it was. I think they're trying to disrupt everything.
Right.
But I think they're only successfully disrupting certain things.
Right. I would love to dig into a couple of films as case studies to kind of to talk a little more in depth, and we can, I'll throw one out to start, and I'm happy to have other people or anyone on this panel throw out one just to sort of get the analysis of sort of what worked and didn't and why. But I actually wanted to start with Columbus because that one was on my mind when I was reading the article in IndieWire about Jim Cummings' film, Thunder Road, the piece in IndieWire yesterday or today, whatever it was. Can you walk us through a little bit, Ryan, a little bit more of the story behind Columbus and sort of where it worked, where it didn't? I mean, there's so much that's said about it from a positive perspective, that it made so much money, it did so well, it's held up as this case study, but can you kind of add some context to this?
I can only walk you through the festival, through the theatrical.
Please.
But basically, the film played at Sundance. It was highly acclaimed. They had an offer from IFC, which was, I think, for under $100,000, and they decided to go with Sundance Fellowship Partnership, for which basically was helping filmmakers learn about distribution, and it gave them a streaming deal with Amazon.
And pause. You were working on the film at.
I actually didn't work on it.
You came on the film after Sundance.
I came on it after. I don't remember how it ended up happening.
But my question was going to be: so IFC was really the only meaningful offer they had at Sundance? Is that
I think so.
understood?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
So they were able to get a deal from Amazon. I can't remember what else, but I know Amazon was a part of it. And when they added the money together, they felt like it was worth the risk to try to put it out there on their own. And so, they had some P&A donated, and it ended up being like somewhere around $150,000, and then after it opened, they got a little bit more, but basically, it was like a very, very small budget, and it was like basically a campaign where most of the money went to publicity and social media, and the film just got great reviews. It was very well booked by Michael Tuckman, who was hired to book the film, and John Cho did a lot of press, the director did a lot of press, and just got great reviews and had a really good word of mouth, and it ended up making $1 million.
Was it the review? Where did you see the sort of turning point that sort of took it from sort of one level to sort of a next level?
I think it had like a mix of that. It was like a satisfying art house film that involved architecture, which was a group that could be targeted very easy. Like, we did these special screenings at the Glass House, I think in Connecticut, and some other place. Can't remember. I'm sorry. It's it's hard for me to remember all the details, even though it was just last year.
A lot has happened since then.
A lot has happened. It happens. Then I took the red eye plane last night. But yeah, I mean, it was just one of those films you could just feel. Sometimes when you're working on a film, you feel like people really like this movie. And yeah, the reviews were great. I mean, it was one of those films that quietly got very, very strong reviews from all the major critics. It got, I think the idea that it was Asian American filmmaker and star actually helped it also. John Cho obviously has a following, and it was just, you know, I played at the right combination of festivals, and the word of mouth is just there for it. I mean, the question is, could it have done more box office if a different distributor picked it up? Maybe, but like, it also goes back to what I was saying, like, there's only a handful of distributors that actually meaningfully probably would have gotten how to distribute this movie on a bigger way.
And conversely, I think you could argue, in certain distributors' hands, it might have done worse. Because a lot of it, as an outsider to that movie and the process, it seemed like a lot of its success had to do with the fact that the people who were working on it were only working on, well, not you, but the filmmakers who were focused on it, and to some extent, I don't know what Michael Tuckman was doing otherwise, but it was the focus, it was the priority of everyone involved, and you know, when you're one of 30 movies, it's harder to get that kind of attention.
Yeah, what I would say is that the filmmakers and producers who literally knew nothing about distribution, and like for someone like me who had to answer probably way more questions about the process than I would ever want to. It was like, I realized like it's not something I would want to do all the time, but I really think at the end of the day, if you asked any of them, they felt like it was, for all of them, it was like more work than they wanted to do too, but they actually came away understanding how to distribute a movie, which is the whole purpose of the program. I mean,
Go ahead.
yeah, no, just that they understood like when you spend money, what it means, and like sometimes spending money on certain things is, I mean, it's like the P&A was so low that to get to $1 million with that P&A, I mean, like every penny had to be counted. So like that was a great learning experience for them. I mean, it was definitely something I had learned at IFC, like where like basically every penny actually is counted. So it was a good process. I think.
And the program, the Sundance Creative Distribution Initiative.
Yes, sorry, that's the name.
Yes, I was like,
As much as you might, I don't put you on the spot, but as much as you might know about that, if you want to add some context.
yeah, so Chris and Liz over at Sundance Creative Distribution, they are incredible, a resource, and you know, I love what they're doing because they are pushing and encouraging more self-distribution, because I think the thought for a long time was like, get your film to Sundance, get distribution, and you walk away, you know, rich and life is grand. But that myth is gone, and for some people it works, for some people it doesn't. And so yes, there's still films that leave Sundance without distribution. So they kind of created this initiative so that, you know, all of their films get distribution, working with, like, you know, with Amazon was doing the Festival Stars program, offering that kind of money. And, you know, I've kind of mostly worked in the self-distribution space, and yes, it's a lot more work. Yes, there's a lot more hand-holding than a lot of distributors, because you're working with first-time filmmakers. And the beauty with, like, self-distribution in Columbus is these filmmakers, they're still retaining their rights for the most part, and they're retaining a lot of that revenue. So that $1 million did go to them. And with distributors, like I said, there are expenses, so it is more expensive to do P&A for a distributor, and correct me if I'm wrong. But, you know, there's a lot of good things about self-distribution, but I'm glad you highlighted how much work it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work, and also everybody that worked on the movie worked at extremely reduced fees. So basically, like, it's a little bit, you know, it's like
It's
something that
scalable.
can't happen all the time.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. Yeah.
Scalable's the right word.
Scalable.
Maybe, Jeff, you could elaborate. I think it's a very good point to make, and I know this is being recorded. So who knows who will be watching this someday, but I think the notion of scalability and sort of why it's not scalable might be worth elaborating on for a moment, because...
Well, mainly just because Ryan's not going to offer that rate to just anybody.
Fair enough.
No, there was a whole team of people that worked at a reduced rate. I mean, I think like it can happen. I mean, I think it can definitely happen, but also there's like, you know, the filmmaker is like a great visual artist that can look at the posters and the trailers and weigh in with his opinion. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why this did so well, and it's like you can't just take any movie that plays at Sundance and do it. Like, and that also for me, part of the draw to work on this movie, it was like, yes, it definitely has something special, and like, it's not gonna be
And
a waste of time.
was it the first one that Sundance Artist Services did in this capacity?
Yes, and then they did another one, I think they had done them before,
Yeah.
but not with a theatrical.
So you almost have to look at all of them if you really want to discuss the model.
Mhm.
But whenever any initiative or distributor has their first one, there's a lot of pressure to make sure it's gonna work.
Yeah.
I think that they did that documentary about sleep, unrest, yes. Thank you, Carol. That one was shortlisted for the Oscar.
Mhm.
I think,
It was a nomination, had a nomination,
and I think it got
or shortlisted.
shortlisted, yeah,
Shortlisted.
shortlisted for the Oscar, and I think it got a pretty decent profile too.
Mhm, mhm.
But I think it was more of like a digital play than a theatrical.
Yeah, because the program has been around for a while, but mainly focusing on digital. So I think, they're starting to have that conversation about theatrical, because, for most filmmakers, theatrical means something. Bring the conversation a little bit back to theatrical. It means a lot to a lot of filmmakers. And, working in the self-distribution space and digital distribution, we get that question a lot. They're like, okay, they want that, but they also recognize where their film is, and knowing that not every film's gonna have a theatrical release. And also, I think it was like, last weekend, last weekend, there was like a president of like 40 films playing.
Yeah, 40
Like,
films open in New York and LA.
yeah, like it's insane.
Is that, I was gonna get to that, and I'm glad you mentioned it, and we can talk about it now for a minute, because that was alarming to me, just as an observer of all of this. Is that going to be a new normal? Was that just a perfect storm of all these movies ending up on this one weekend at the same time? Or do we have to accommodate for an industry that's gonna have to deal with that?
It's always
40 is really,
it's always like 20 plus films a week now.
Yeah.
And like if you think about in the past month, it was like 250 films premiered at Toronto, 40 films opened the weekend after in theaters. I mean, it's an insane level of films, but some of the films are opening in theaters because, they just want the reviews to help kind of like, so people know that they exist, and then they go to digital platforms. I mean, that's the reason why, like, the New York Times has said they're not gonna review every movie anymore. I mean, I do think the New York Times still reviews, like, almost every movie of major, no, I can't think of something like, that there's been like, controversy because they didn't review it. I think they're just trying to weed out, like, films that are, truly not. I mean, I guess everyone has their reasons for being difficult, so I shouldn't say anything.
If only Netflix could buy more of those movies and take them out of the running.
this is when you wish someone from Netflix were sitting.
I mean, I think the Netflix thing is interesting, like last week they opened Nicole Holofcener's movie.
Yeah.
And I heard her do an interview on Vanity Fair talking about how like she wishes it had more theatrical, but at the same time she got to make exactly how she wanted it, cast exactly who she wanted to cast, and it's the movie she wanted to make. And so she said, I mean, what she basically said is like, I love theatrical, but like, to be honest, I watch a lot of movies online, and like, I'm not gonna complain about it, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and Amazon might buy some theaters too, so we don't know about that.
If we do this panel in another year or 2 years, it'll be interesting to see where we are. In terms of case studies, and we could choose any number of films, I thought it might be interesting to talk about a documentary, just because there's been, and we could do Theoretical Strangers, or we could talk about another one if you guys would prefer. But I thought it would be interesting to use one documentary as a way into a conversation about sort of where we are with theatrical for documentary at this particular moment, just because it has been, it seems to have been such a robust year, if I'm not mistaken, in what the trades are reporting. But what is causing that, and what are the cracks in that? Is that how is that sustainable, or is it sustainable, or again, is it a perfect storm moment?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that part of it has to do with low expectations, because last year everyone was talking about the death of the theatrical documentary, which I always thought was bullshit. For some of the reasons that Ryan was talking about, I think people thought that because Netflix was doing so many docs, therefore it cannibalizes theatrical. But in actuality, it just makes more people comfortable with the format, and when the right movie comes along, it can work theatrically. And I think, so this year I just think like a lot of the right movie came along.
Why do you think Three Identical Strangers was the right movie at the right moment? I think it's a really strong film, and I was able to see it early on, and was pleasantly surprised with how well it's done.
So, well, there's a few things. One is, I think the movie itself is just, it's one of those astonishing stories that is really easy to market in some ways, and also gives you more once you see it. There's, you know, we went into it knowing that the word of mouth was going to be through the roof. What we didn't know was to what extent we could get people to go to begin with, because as compared with RBG, Mr. Rogers, Whitney, McQueen, all of these other docs that did well, mostly, which had built-in audiences based on a celebrity, we were the only non-celebrity doc. So we weren't sure to what extent we could get people to go. We thought it would be more of like a Searching for Sugar Man or Capturing the Freedmans, where it opens soft and then continues to play forever. And we were right that it would continue to play forever. We underestimated that the starting point. It opened to 35 per screen on, I think, 4 screens, and it exceeded our expectations. And I think MoviePass does deserve some credit there, for sure. I think, you know, and so we're rooting for MoviePass, or whatever iterations of MoviePass continue to exist, because I do think that in the major markets, we have reason to believe that they added up to 40% of the gross.
I mean, I have to think MoviePass had a big impact, because there's, like, in other summers, like, I worked on a lot of movies that have done decent box office, but this summer, like, we went from, like, Hereditary, which made 15 million, to Sorry to Bother You, which made, like, 17, Mr. Rogers, which made 25, Leave No Trace, which is, like, a challenging movie that made $6 million, and Three Identical Strangers. I mean, that's, like, an insane run of films, and, I mean, I don't know, like, I think MoviePass had, like, I was at the Angelica the night Sorry to Bother You opened, and Three Identical Strangers and Leave No Trace and Mr. Rogers were all playing there, and RBG, and the MoviePass had broken down. And you could, it was like the first night, like, when, like, they just wasn't working, in June, and, like, that was the beginning of, like, when it started to not work a lot, but, like, people were, like, you could tell were really angry online. There were all these people, like, on their phones, like, it's not working, so I think it had to have contributed.
I mean, MoviePass is such a controversial topic. At the Film Society, it accounted for anywhere from 20 to 30% of our ticket sales on any given week, and it wasn't just first runs. Our Visconti retrospective, I think it was over 25% of the ticket sales. However, when you have, and Russ can probably speak to this from the listserv, from Art House, there's been a heated debate going on about MoviePass really since last year's convergence. I was in a conversation with a head of a distribution company just in Telluride recently, and this person was just like vehemently angry about the existence of and the idea of MoviePass, and was adamant that it's either ruining or going to ruin the film business as we know it, and really got like kind of personally angry with me for trying to even have a civil or a conversation in which I defended why we decided at the Film Society to embrace and explore it, and simply that goes to what you were talking about, at least the idea of I feel like, as someone who now works at a theater and a film festival, we have to be open to anything that disrupts the way in which audiences and the kinds of audiences find out about, engage with, and attend our movie theaters. That's how we feel as a movie theater, but there are other people who feel completely the opposite, and I've been hearing those kinds of conversations, so.
Well, that's unfortunate, because I'm telling you, like, even my own family and, like, you know, in more part of North Carolina or in Alabama, they use MoviePass, they use these things, and they're telling me about the films that I've seen at festivals. Like, have you seen this movie? I said, well, yeah, I saw it at a festival. So it's just an exposure of independent films that they're getting, and they're taking a chance. I think that's what Netflix initially did with independent film. People are like, oh, I have nothing to lose, I can just put on this movie, and then they're watching independent films. People that you would never even like know it was independent film, but they connect with it. So it's really important, and I'm happy that these things exist. But like I said, I also recognize that it is disruptive, and it's going to take some kind of friction for some change to happen. But I'm all for anything that allows, you know, marginalized communities to be exposed to art house cinema.
There's nothing more valuable than standing outside a movie theater on a Friday night or a Tuesday night and actually talking with the folks who are walking up and spending money and learning more about what drives those decisions. I wanted to see, Ryan, just to finish up on what Jeff was saying about Three Identical Strangers, was there anything else I know you worked on the film, and was there anything else any context you could add to that?
I mean, I think like every year there's like one doc that like when you see it, like I saw it before Sundance. I actually saw RBG and Three Identical Strangers, and they were the same. It was the same. They were both CNN films, and like we thought Three Identical Strangers had much more potential in our office, like before the festival. Mainly because like with RBG they said that she wasn't going to be available, and so we were like, let's definitely do Three Identical Strangers. But like you could kind of just tell it was one of those stories, like exactly what Jeff said, like that people would talk about, that there was nothing else like it on the horizon. Because when you at Sundance, you can kind of get a very good snapshot of like what a lot of the year is going to be like. And like the year before, we had seen Icarus, which was like a very similar thing, which actually went to Netflix, and no one will ever know if that could have been a theatrical success, but also like one of those kind of like stories that you only see. You know when you're seeing something that people will talk about.
I want to see if anyone in the audience wants to steer our conversation in a different direction, or ask for clarity on anything we've talked about. I would love for Russ or Ira to weigh in at some point too, because they might have some guidance on some of the things we're talking about. But anyone, there's microphones. Let's go up here, second row. Wait for the mic real quick, because I know we're recording.
A lot of what you're talking about with MoviePass is about accessibility. And as a millennial who could not afford to go to the movies before this summer, it's definitely had a big impact on my interest in going to the movies. And I'm curious, besides putting the onus on theaters and on Netflix or on things like MoviePass, what, in terms of your jobs in distribution and in marketing, do you do to try to address issues of accessibility?
I'll kick off the conversation. My main day-to-day work is digital sales, so I take a film and I make sure we kind of maximize the amount of money we make on platforms. So like working directly with like iTunes and Amazon and other platforms, mainly on the transactional side and in cable. So they have kind of like a set audience that they are kind of looking for. So it's a matter of going through the film, picking out things that I know their audience is going to really like, and also kind of like, oh, hey, you also have this other audience on your platform too, then this can totally reach that audience. I think it's going to be holistic for your subscriber base. I think we talked a lot about with Columbus about grassroots. I work for Good Deed Entertainment, and we do a lot of grassroots outreach. So our film, A Loving Vincent, so we did a lot of outreach to, different art museums and anybody who's interested in animation, art, Vincent Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, I don't know how you pronounce it. So like really kind of like detailing that and finding ways to kind of like reach the audience that, okay, you may have heard of this, but like let's actually take it a step further. So I think the kind of solution for accessibility is is for distributors to take the step forward, to kind of like, I'll give you this one example, like, a lot of people say that, and I think with Sorry to Bother You, Boots has pointed this out too, like, oh, black films don't sell overseas, but has anyone ever tried to sell it overseas? You know, so taking a chance on films like Sorry to Bother You, which was one of my favorite films this year. So it's just a matter of distributors taking a chance, going the extra mile, finding the audiences, and kind of doing the hard work. And yes, we're doing the hard work.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on that a little bit, you know, I guess one way of increasing accessibility is to experiment with platforms and make sure that a film is available on as many platforms as possible, so to effectively give the consumer the choice of how they want to see it. But then conversely, the other thing that you can do is take a leap of faith and lean in with advertising that is directly targeted at a specific audience that maybe is not, according to conventional wisdom, easy to get to go see your movie theatrically. So that unfortunately requires an expense that oftentimes people aren't willing to take, but that's one thing that I've been really proud of Neon in doing on, just for example, this movie Monsters and Men that we have coming out next weekend, which is a movie that really splits the difference, I would say, in terms of who it's for. It could be conceived as being an art house movie for a much more traditional, sort of traditionally thought of as being a predominantly white, older art house audience, but it is a movie about African Americans. It's directed by an African American, and so there's an obvious play there to promote the movie to an African American audience. And while conventional wisdom would say it's really hard to split that difference and get both of those audiences in, what we're doing is we're trying to do both. So we're doing all of the fundamentals of an art house release, booking it in art house theaters. We're also booking it in multiplexes in which you're more likely to get an African American turnout, and we're doing a TV spend, which some might say is crazy, towards a more African American audience. So it's a lot of that. In this case, it's about being willing to take that leap of faith, as you were saying, and putting your money where your mouth is.
Other questions?
So, in terms of MoviePass and Netflix, I think the disruptive quality is upsetting to a lot of folks in the art house community, and there has been essentially a lot of foolish ranting about both of them. And I thought the way that this panel has framed the discussion on Netflix is excellent and right on target. The MoviePass, I think one of the things that we need to remember is that the way that it's configured to date until it essentially fell apart was it was providing such a huge subsidy intrinsically that it was unsustainable, and they never really answered how that was going to be sustainable. So I think that was the problem, and there were people anticipating it falling apart, and I'm still looking for someone to explain to me how that would be a sustainable model. The other thing about art houses is many art houses have membership programs that essentially provide similar kinds of services, free films or prepaid films, the way that MoviePass does, and you're encouraging people to abuse the system in the fact that if they go to more movies than the thing costs, yay for you, but most people don't do that. It's like a sports club membership. So I think the combination of fear of it disrupting the membership programs that were already successful and already generating a fairly large audience, and the fact that how is this going to be sustainable? There was also a lot of talk about it cheapening the film going process, which I never really understood anyway. But the lack of sustainability of the business model and a lack of MoviePass being able to explain how it was going to work, other than, yeah, it's like Amazon, and it's like, well, they sold everything, and I don't, how are you going to sell everything? But anyway, I'd love to hear more people talk in an intelligent way about MoviePass and what that next step is going to be, because clearly it made a big difference, and I'd love to have that kind of difference be sustained over time, but don't know quite how.
I think the biggest danger with MoviePass is just getting people used to the idea of seeing movies for free in theaters. And so it's just about finding the right balance between increasing accessibility and not going too far. And it seems like now they've dialed it back, they've stopped the bleeding, and it's about just experimenting until you find the right price and the right amount of movies per month. And, I think there are other companies that are experimenting with this model as well, so we'll see who figures out the exact silver bullet.
I just wanted to add on to Russ's comment about art houses, and part of the frustration of MoviePass came from the fact that the burden of the customer support fell on the art houses. And I think that's something that, as distributors, you guys don't feel that burden. I mean, you have certainly other burdens that you feel, but that one, that sense of like the connection from the audience to the art house. So even not being able to get a film, the art house is the one that's feeling that pressure from their audience. And so I think that's something unique to art houses, that they're sort of, in the case of MoviePass, if something went wrong with MoviePass, they were asking the front of house kid, and he's like, I don't run this, and MoviePass obviously doesn't have great customer service. But I think too, going back to the Netflix, going back to the Netflix conversation, not distributing, I think as Jeff said, in any meaningful way in theaters, you'll get, I worked at Michigan Theater for a long time, and we would have people come in all the time and say, why aren't you getting this film? I saw it in the New York Times. And this idea, and maybe you guys can speak to this as distributors, is how you actually choose to market in which markets. Because now that things are global and anyone can read a review in the New York Times, they want to know why it's not coming to their community, and having to explain to them in a simplistic way, the distributor doesn't find our market important enough or valuable enough, is really hard to say to your audience. And so I guess if you guys could speak to how you go about choosing that market. Do you see that changing now that people can access things? Do you find have new markets cropped up that, besides New York and LA, that you feel like, oh, this is it's a growing film going community, and I would do more theatrical in this city?
Well, I'm so glad we talked a little bit about day and date, but I think that has a lot to do with it. I know at Good Deed, our priority is, the 10 top markets for, cable premium pricing, for iTunes premium pricing, that's our main priority. And then we think about okay, where are some other films? For example, where are some markets? For example, we just had a film, one of the 40 last weekend, it was our film Don't Leave Home. It was kind of like an elevated genre film from South by Southwest by Michael Tully. And we knew that he was from Austin, so we did a bigger push in Austin out of any other market. And I'm okay, and then we have another film coming out next month, After Everything, that has more younger crowd, it has Jeremy Allen right in it. So, we're looking for more college towns. So it really just depends on the film, and that's being well, since we're a much smaller distributor, so we can think a little bit more about which markets we want to be in, but our main priority are the top 10. First things first, and even when we do kind of wider releases, and then seeing where the demand. So, if someone's demanding a film, say for example, if you're demanding Loving Vincent, we would by all means, if you call us, we'll absolutely send it to us. But I think that goes with being a smaller distributor. So I don't know your thoughts about it.
I think from Neon's perspective, any theater in the country that wants to play one of our movies can play them, and I think it's a pretty symbiotic relationship in the conversation between our theatrical distribution department and all of the exhibitors. You know your market better than we could ever, and so if you tell us that there's a market for this movie, the only reason we wouldn't book it is if there's some sort of conflict between your theater and another theater in the same market, and that gets into nuances, but yeah, we would always do that.
But is your question also about the resources that the distributor would put behind that?
Yeah, I think that's part of it too,
Because I think that's also
because
probably
it's,
proposition you have to evaluate internally.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's about what the opportunity is, right? So you never want to spend more than you think you're going to make in a market if it's dedicated to that market. But again, I think that if we were getting feedback from an exhibitor saying there's massive demand for this movie, then we would support that. Both
And
in
you can
terms of-
rely on the infrastructure of an existing
Yeah.
institution that knows that audience well and perhaps has the resources in-house to even reach that audience directly, rather than having to spend
Yeah.
more aggressively in that local market, even given the fact that maybe those weeklies don't exist, the alt weeklies or other publications maybe won't exist anyway, so you might want to rely on, or you would rely more on
Yeah.
on the
We
existing
need
art
alt
house.
weeklies. We need alt weeklies, you know, don't let them die.
If the question is why won't Netflix book the theater, you'd have to ask them.
For sure, and there's no one who will answer that question. No, I don't work at the theater anymore, so I don't have to worry about that.
I would love to have a few more questions from, yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about self-distribution and like how are these filmmakers, are they approaching platforms themselves, like without a sales agent, or do they have a sales agent and working with a sales agent but without a distributor, and what kinds of platforms are they targeting? Like I attended a panel on a distribution platform that was in the cryptocurrency realm, which, you know, where like the artists retain all the rights. So I just want to hear more about your experience with self-distribution.
Yeah, so I worked at a company called Distributor, and Distributor, like the company Quiver, these names are really interesting. But their sole function is to work as like kind of, I don't want to call it a platform, but a conduit for self-distribution. You know, on a top level, you either pay an upfront fee to have your film delivered to certain platforms that you select, say for example, iTunes. If you choose Netflix, you have to go through a review process. It's likely not going to go to Netflix. Amazon, and then we kind of take your film files and we upload it ourselves, and then you get to keep the revenue, use a dashboard. So that's like a top level of what aggregators do. You know, the challenge is the cost is upfront to you, and there's no marketing support. So it is a big challenge. So you can get your film up there, but it's going to be buried underneath like a bunch of other titles. And you know, part of my role is making sure our films get placement, our dreaded placement on iTunes. So it's one of those industry things is that you kind of have to fight with certain gatekeepers to get that placement, and it's really challenging to get that placement. It's like either to their taste or to the customer's taste. So you know, so you have these distributors that already want the prime placement on the platform that you're fighting against. So you can spend $2,000 to get your film on the platforms, but you probably won't make $2,000 without the marketing help, without any P&A. So that's like it's good and bad, and they'll tell you like, we're here to filmmakers, you keep all your rights, keep all your revenue, that's great, but it does have its challenges. And then there are other kind of theatrical self-distribution. I don't know if Tug or Gather are still around, but there are ways you can kind of get into theaters and yourself, and there's also like non-theatrical, which I think companies like Swank and other ones, you kind of have to be a distributor to kind of go to them, but I don't think they would ignore you if you're a filmmaker and you just want to know more information about the non-theatrical space as well. So Amazon has their Video Direct program where you can upload your film directly to Amazon and start earning revenue there. But once again, the challenge is the film getting buried. So there are good things, and I think that's why we mentioned Columbus and that example, is that they had the marketing support. So if you are going to do self-distribution, you have to invest in marketing.
Ira.
This is actually not a question, but I just thought I'd mention that you're mentioning Columbus a lot. And the folks from Sundance are actually coming to campus next week to present the entire case study of Columbus. So it's next Thursday for those students in the room. You'll be getting information about it by email. So.
Can non-students attend? Is that possible now?
Yeah, maybe, if you know the right people.
One question I wanted to ask the panel, and as long as we have time, I'll allow, we can take more questions from the audience, but it might be a way to kind of get back to this question of Crossroads, and I think I would love to know from each panelist sort of what are the aspects of the industry at this moment that are the greatest either obstacles or challenges that you see as the most definable obstacles or challenges? And if you can posit sort of a way around that obstacle or challenge or what you're thinking about.
I would say, like, for what I do, the biggest challenge is that literally the minute a film premieres at a festival, like, basically the entire future is determined, because the way social media and publicity works now is like once a film screens, like you can never really go back.
So you can't turn, it's harder to turn.
It's very, I mean, you can do it, but it's very hard, and I would say that.
Can you give us an example, either positive or negative?
I think, like, you know, like so much goes into like getting into the right festival, and then what theater are you gonna be in? What time are you gonna play? What are you against? And like how many tickets do you have for press, and how many tickets do you have for buyers? And like, it's like this insane chemistry that you have to put together to get a film off the ground. And it's almost like you have to go through and think of every single person. Like, you can't just like put it into a festival and be like, great. It's like, it's for like a movie like Moonlight, it was like figuring out who the right critics were that you wanted to weigh in first. A lot of times at certain festivals, you know, when the public screenings first, you get like 25 tickets for press. So it's like, who are those 25 people, and what do you want to get out of them? And so it's like, I think some good examples, like Hereditary was a movie at Sundance this year, where we were able to figure out who was going to come to the screening and basically like target people that we thought would like the movie. And yeah, we got quotes like in the first screening, like, this is the next generation's Exorcist or something like that. So I think it's scary because like once a film premieres, the tweets and the social media, like basically everyone starts weighing in, and like within 5 minutes of the movie premiering, you know, like if people like the movie, like what the world thinks, and how, like, you know, like who's gonna buy it, like what other festivals are gonna want to show it. It's pretty, I think it's a scary thing for filmmakers now.
From your vantage point, is there a movie that you were able to successfully kind of turn or shape the maybe didn't get the response you wanted at first, or wasn't seen, maybe a better way to say it, maybe the right people didn't see it at that first
I
screening?
think like Swiss Army Man, this movie was, had a really bad situation in that it premiered at this big venue at Sundance, and it started late because the movie before it started late. The theater stuff was not totally on it and let too many people into the theater. So, and it was also a very like high profile movie that like had too much buzz.
Mhm.
So like
Expectations were too high.
people did like walk out, and like this one writer, Jeff Snyder, who wrote an article saying that like there were mass walkouts, with then every single trade at Sundance had written mass walkouts of Daniel Radcliffe, Paul Danielson movie at Sundance before the film had even ended. So by the time everyone got out of the screening, Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Deadline, IndieWire had written these walkout stories. So it was really bad, and like it was like probably one of the more anticipated movies at Sundance that year. And luckily, we had like really thought through what press were there. So the minute the reviews started hitting, they were really good. But you had this dueling narrative of like, all the reviews are good, but like the public thinks this movie is not. There's something wrong with this movie. So it took like a week, and like we had to get like press to kind of champion and defend it like very quickly at Sundance and take a stand like this is a very unique special movie. And I think like by the end there were 3 or 4 companies that wanted to buy it. A24 actually ended up buying it, but you know, that kind of stigma stayed with it. But at least also it became a badge of honor. Like the reviews were good, and it was. But I think it definitely, I mean, that's the kind of situation, it's not like an ideal one, and I think it's hard. I mean, it happens, that's why like also, you know, people have become so much more cautious about what festivals they go to for their movies.
Distributors are being, or buyers, I'm sorry, sellers are being more.
Filmmakers and distributors. I mean, it's like social media has just totally changed how people think about movies.
It seems, I would observe, and I won't ask people in this panel to agree or disagree, but you can see what's happened just in this past year, even the past 6 months, of films that did or didn't go to Cannes and why, films that did or didn't go to Telluride, Toronto, Venice, and why.
Well, you told me a good example, like
Right.
a couple years ago when before Moonlight had premiered at Telluride, knowing it was in the New York Film Festival, and ticket sales were really low, and then immediately after Telluride, and all the press started hitting, and it became like this kind of like word was like it was a very special movie. The tickets immediately started selling out.
Yeah, just to add to that, I recall calling my office, probably called Irene, who's sitting here in the office, or in the room, about this. I remember it was the Friday of Telluride, and the film wasn't selling yet. I knew I was going to see Barry that weekend, and I knew he'd probably ask me how it was selling, and I was anxious about it. And it just in that weekend, in the attention that the film got just from that one weekend in Telluride, it hadn't played in Toronto yet, but it had been announced on our lineup. Everything changed immediately after that. The ticket sales increased. We saw the same thing at the Film Society with the New York Film Festival screenings of Roma. Going into that fall festival season, we had some conversations internally with some serious concerns about how the film, even though we all felt very strongly about it, how the film was going to sell. And by this week, after all these festivals and everything, it's one of our fastest selling films. We're adding screenings. It's not a question. The bigger question, I think, also to this question of what are the biggest hurdles, is where we have to go to try to get that consensus, whether it's critics or publications that are increasingly challenged, or whether we do have to rely on the social media response.
It's a mix, because the critics actually do mean a huge amount, at the beginning of the life of the film, because the trades break the first reviews, but it's a mix of voices and stuff that gets retweeted thousands of times at a festival. So, a lot of times Eric Cohn can be like one of the first people to push out a review, and like IndieWire has these very kind of like attention-grabbing headlines. So sometimes you get lucky and you get like, I'm trying to think of one, like Angelina Jolie's best film, like for First They Killed My Father last year at Telluride, that just got retweeted like, thousands of times.
What was the one where he compared We the Animals to Moonlight?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that one helped, because it was like, in a way, it was like setting the bar so high, but like, that is kind of like the world that these movies exist in. And it's, I just think it's there's a lot of,
And that's not one that's surmountable, it sounds like. The second half of my question was, how do you overcome it, or how do you get around that obstacle or hurdle? And for what you're saying, it's really just about hopefully having the right, not just the right outlets, but the right people from the right outlets in the room at the right screening time in the right venue, where the theater lets everybody in on time so they're not upset. And it's like a really fragile, sounds pretty fragile.
It all comes down to the Sundance volunteers.
Yes.
it's true. I mean, kind of, right? Like this year at Sundance, one of the opening night films, Blind Spotting, which I thought was really great. The first screening at the Eccles was the sponsors basically took up the ground floor, and like apparently like it didn't play well, but it played well at every other screening in town that night. So, and multiple people told me they were in the room and it just kind of felt flat. And then like the screening at the other venues that night was much better. So it's definitely, there's a lot of factors to think about.
Jeff, same question, obstacles, hurdles, how do we overcome them?
I'm going to give a more acquisitions-oriented
Please.
answer, since that's what I do. But tying back to what I said earlier, in a landscape in which it's much harder, I think, to put out middle-of-the-road product and reliably succeed in theaters, it's just all the more important to be one of the few movies that are the cream of the crop. And so from an acquisitions or production standpoint, that's extremely difficult, is to make sure that you're picking the right movies or making the right movies. So that, to me, is my biggest challenge.
And again, hard to define the solution to that challenge.
It's really, I mean,
Just make amazing movies.
yeah,
Find
no,
amazing movies.
exactly. I feel like whenever I talk about this in a setting like this, sometimes it's two filmmakers, and it's when that's the diagnosis, it sounds kind of daunting,
Yeah.
and that's because it is daunting.
Yeah.
There is no
Yeah.
prescription for how to do that.
Yeah. Elise.
So, the biggest challenge, there's kind of two challenges I see, that's kind of holding this up at the crossroads, and that's, one is, the push and the understanding for diversity. I think it's been a conversation that's been happening the past couple of years. So diversity in terms of people of color, diversity in terms of like women, and, kind of the indie film posts like Weinstein and posts like, people being more open and honest about, having this common respect for human beings, simple things. But also kind of like, I see understanding that we're kind of entering in a new space, and a new space that's becoming less and less white and more diverse, and I think that's really important. And we're going to have some growing pains with it, they're going to have some challenges, and, I think that, if you look at someone like Ryan Coogler, who is, very much an indie, filmmaker, started off as an indie filmmaker doing something like Black Panther, and Terrence Nance, also a small indie filmmaker who's going to be doing Space Jam 2. So we're seeing like this kind of shift happening where indie filmmakers are finally, indie filmmakers of color, women filmmakers, filmmakers with disabilities, filmmakers who identify as queer, LGBTQ. Now it's going to be a moment, and I'm really excited about that moment. And the other side is, in terms of all filmmakers, how are filmmakers going to be successful in this industry and sustain in being in independent film? Like working in the aggregation space kind of opened my eyes a lot to like, hey, there's a lot of people out here making content, a lot of people. And these films are sitting on hard drives, or they're withering away on platforms, so there needs to be kind of a solution. Because I don't want, films to stop being made, but it's just, we're becoming inundated. So I don't have a real solution for that right now. I see the solution with diversity, but I'm seeing the solution on finding homes for these films, making sure filmmakers are able to continue to create and, make a living off of making films. And, I don't have an answer for that.
I think we're out of time. Final plug one film or thing that's coming up that you want to put a word in for, last chance.
I think our film, After Everything, is coming out October 12th. It's a day and date, so it's going to be in 10 markets. And on iTunes, Amazon, Fandango Now, other platforms. So that's the number one thing for me right now, is like making sure the film is out and open.
And I'll go with Monsters and Men, which is coming out next week in New York and LA on 9/28, directed by Ronaldo Green. It's his first film. It's one of the best debut films I've ever seen. It's a really beautiful film that we picked up in Sundance, I hope everybody sees it next weekend.
Ryan, you can only pick one.
I'm going to plug the New York Film Festival.
Oh, thanks. I wonder why. How many films do you have?
It's my favorite time of year. There's
Yes.
so many great movies showing there, and yes, many that I'm working on.
Very good. Well, I did bring some, as I was leaving the office to come up here, the team in our marketing office asked me to bring some catalogs for the festival, so I brought as many as I could carry on the subway, and I put them on the table out front. I don't know if they're still there. Irene?
And I'm going to say that there are tickets.
There are.
Do not let people feed you this line that there are no tickets to the films. There are tickets.
I can tell you for a fact that that is true.
Yes, I did ticketing there for a long time. There are tickets to the films.
Thank you very much
Love you.
to everyone.